Hey everybody, Hunter back again from Showtime Studios. We're going to do the next part of the build tutorial, and the last two videos were on priming the chassis that you see in front of you. And of course we did that through the airbrush, but like I say, you can do it through a can. The results are going to be very similar. I just chose to shoot it through the airbrush, keep my overspray down in the booth that I just cleaned up, because when you use a can, it clogs up the filters very quickly. So I just went ahead and did it with the airbrush, but like I say, same results with a can for the most part. But how it came out is pretty good. Real happy with it. It's the primer laid down real nice, and trying to get everything to focus here. There we go. And you can tell everything around the front suspension is primed and looks good, even over top of the kit chrome and stuff that we had on there. If you remember, the lower control arms were kit chrome, and also the four-link bars at the rear. And I don't know why we're not focusing in there like we were. Somebody said put a black panel behind it, but unfortunately, that's not doesn't seem to be working either. So, um, but we got everything primed and looking pretty decent. It's like the camera wants to focus and then it goes out of focus. Not sure what's going on with that. But we got this all in the gray primer now from Napa. And if you had any flaws or whatever at this stage, you'd want to go back in and address them. Everything looks pretty good so far, so we're ready to move on to the paint stage. But what I would recommend on this Napa primer, if you need to sand anything out or clean up anything, is the 3000 grit sanding sponge from 3M or Gator Grip, or there's a couple other manufacturers of them out there. But this is the 3000. They make it in a 5000 too. And you can just go in, say if you had a spot here on the bottom of the fuel tank that you needed to get out, you can just go in lightly with this 3000 grit, sand that, and take a wider brush and just get all your sanding residue out of everything. And if you didn't break all the way through the primer, you can go ahead and move right on to paint. If you went through the primer, I would recommend, really depending on what color you're going with, is to go back in and make sure that you have everything in gray. It makes your color, come out a lot more even, and everything should look pretty good for you. So now what we have on top here, in case anybody has noticed this, which I'm sure you have, this is a piece of just solid rod. And what I put this on here for is when I get into painting with the can, I'm going to be using this as a holding stick. And that way I can spray, everything on the chassis here, and then I can flip the chassis over and spray everything on the bottom. Now, I normally don't do it this way because I'm using the airbrush, and I'll set the chassis on something, or sometimes I will hang the chassis and then go back in and touch up the area where the hook was. But in this case, we're going to go back to something I've used before, and that is a piece of solid styrene. And what I did is, you can find a spot on your chassis. On my big truck builds and stuff like that, sometimes I will have a hole in the frame or in a chassis component that I can slip a toothpick or a long skewer or something like that into. That works very well. But in the case of this little chassis, there's really nowhere to mount anything to except for the spindles. And I don't have the little stands. I've seen some people use clothespins to make a little stand, but you have to have them kind of double sided, because if you're spraying the top side, you need to turn it over this way and set it back down. So what I do is just come in with a simple piece of solid rod, and I will find a spot on the model that's going to be covered up when it's finished. And in the case of this, the radiator sits right through this entire front plate right here. The radiator covers up this whole thing. So I went ahead and super glued the styrene right to it, between the pin for the radiator and this little spacer that we made. If you remember, and I'm not sure if I mentioned anything about it else about it, is I actually took and made a little spacer to bring the radiator up to meet the air intake on the engine. And believe it or not, I don't know if it'll zoom in on this, but if you look very closely at this little block right there, you will notice that it has a 43 on it. And what that is I was figuring I calculated my space that I needed, and I actually came in and cut one of the parts tree numbers off of the parts tree, the little plate that it's on, and that's what I used for the spacer for to get our air intake to line up right way. So it's amazing, some of the little things that you can come up with and kind of tweak and use for different purposes. And like I say, none of this will be seen when the model is together. So that glue spot that we have there, even though there'll be no paint on it, you could go back in and touch that up before you put the radiator in. And if I get anything that where the paint would chip off down the sides of it or something like that, I'll go back in and touch that up real lightly, but we shouldn't have a problem. So that's a little trick that you can use. You have to be very careful when you're spraying, and I will be the first one to admit that doing it this way, I have been spraying at the booth before like this, and the part that I'm spraying drops off because the glue joint breaks. So hopefully that doesn't happen when we're spraying this chassis at the booth with the Racing White from Tamiya, and we're going to be doing that straight out of the can because I think it's a lot easier for the beginning guys out there to use a can. And I did spray this with an airbrush, but like I say, you can do it out of a can, basically the same results. And then what I'll be doing with the Tamiya spray can color on this is basically the same procedure that you would use for primer out of a can for the most part. So that's all we have for this episode. Just wanted to show you how the little chassis came out. This is the Napa color line primer in gray. It came out great. I'm real happy with it. I'm a firm believer in this product. I know some other people have tried it and haven't had good luck with it, but I love it. I have plenty of it in stock here on the shelf, and when I'm getting a little low, I'll go out and buy 6 or 8 cans of it at a time. So just so I've got it. So what we're going to do in the next part of the series is we're going to go over to the spray booth. We'll have the camera set up over there like we did for the priming video, and we're going to get this thing sprayed in Racing White from Tamiya, straight out of the can. So stay tuned for that one. If you have any questions or concerns up to this stage, let me know and leave me a comment or whatever. We'll be more than glad to help you out with that. So until the painting tutorial that's coming up, this is Hunter from Showtime Studios, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.